Mr. Lichtenstein, you were born in New York City, and you received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from New York in 1988. What had propelled you to pursue the arts, and had you always been drawn to the arts? Were you or was it something that you just kind of learned to love later in life?
Well, I was born into the arts, right? So what do I mean by that? My mother and my father were both artists, right? So painters, sculptors, um, and the earliest image of me that I ever saw was as a little baby. I had crawled on top of one of my father's canvases where he was just had prepared it with what's called gesso, like he put the white coat on and he was going to paint on it. And as a baby, I crawled onto it and grabbed some brushes and I started painting all around on this canvas. But what is a canvas? A canvas is a frame, right?
Yeah.
It's a picture. So from my earliest childhood, I was immersed in a frame. And I was always fascinated by um, pictures and movies and stories. Certainly, like any young kid, comic books and images and stories. So everything became about story and images to me. My parents both being artists and painters and watercolors and oil paints and sketches and drawing and pencil sketches, and there was art around me all the time. So that was just a part of my world and my upbringing. And then I started reading at a pretty young age, and I started reading very, thick books while I was still in, elementary school and grade school, like Shogun,
Oh,
or the Dune trilogy, or,
wow.
Isaac Asimov's Foundation, or, you know, uh, you, all of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. These were books I was reading as a child.
Wow.
Uh, and I got very fascinated with storytelling. And as I continued, my discovery of storytelling, I continued my understanding and discovery of the frame, drawing and doing sketches and things of that nature. There was a big music room in the home I grew up in, and I was always, playing on the piano or playing with different musical instruments. So art, music, creativity surrounded me. And then, I started getting very fascinated with photography. And I think I was in eighth grade, which is junior high here in America,
Yeah.
when I took a photo of a sporting event of our football, soccer, our
Okay.
soccer,
Okay.
captain scoring the winning goal with a headbutt,
Hmm.
and I caught the action of him flying through the air and the other soccer players flying and trying to get the ball and the facial expressions and the sweat and the hair and that picture went on to the front page of a newspaper that covered three states, which was Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. So that's like the equivalent of your photograph being on the cover of a newspaper that's in three countries in Europe.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so and my little photo credit, photo by,
Yeah.
that was the photo in the front of the newspaper. So I had that. I so suddenly, as a kid, I was in principle a professional photographer because I had been published, and I just kept studying, motion picture. Now I got very fascinated with video cameras. Back then, it was still old reel to reels. You took a small reel that had magnetic tape and you threaded it through the machine, and then you
Uh-huh.
put it on the other reel, and then you went record, and you had a big old camera with a big cable, and nothing like today, right?
Yeah,
This camera is,
you can shoot
most
movies.
powerful,
Yeah.
film tools available. So that became the process was, just constantly in the act of creation.
Yeah. You were at one point you were also chairman of the New York Independent Film Coalition for 2 years. So I've got a question that I have to ask you.
Mhm.
What do you make of the current status of the film industry where these giant big movies like superhero movies, comic book movies seem to have eroded um, like any chance of original mid-budget movies that once were the bread and butter of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. What's happened is that the the middle is kind of like society, right?
Yeah,
So art often mimics culture and society, right?
yeah,
So
definitely.
in society, what do we have? We have more billionaires than we've ever had, with more control and more money. Um, the Sorry, let me just turn the ringer off of my phone.
Sure.
Uh, and we have, you know, a concentration of money and power, in the hands of fewer people, even though there are more of them than there's ever been before, meaning more multimillionaire, billionaire types. And then at the same time, we have more poor people than we've ever had. So the middle has been gutted out.
Yeah.
There's very little middle class. You're either you have no money or you have too much money. And there's very few people that are surviving in the middle.
Yeah, there's no in between. Like,
I think I'm one of the few people that's kind of in the middle, which is um, I don't have, the kind of capital resources to launch even a small movie on my own. I always have to go to investors, to make in Hollywood what's, 5 to 10 million is considered a small movie, right?
uh,
That kind of you're talking about that middle ground of movie is sort of like that 15 to $35 million film.
yeah.
And then you have like this no man's land, and then you're in these huge budgets that are 100 million, 150 million, 200 million. What and you're dealing with a very particular, business reality, right? So theatrical distribution is slowly fading. Most people watch their programming on streamers, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Apple, Disney Plus, etc. Right? That's where most people are getting their content. So the demand for content is higher than it's ever been, but the threshold for quality is lower than it's ever been. So you've got a higher demand with lower quality. So movies and streaming series, not all. I think that the greatest place where the most work is being done at a theatrical level is in large streamers shows, big shows,
Okay.
right? Peaky Blinders, Okay, you want to take a show, right?
The
That's
Penguin also.
yeah. Hmm?
The Penguin.
Yeah, now the Penguin.
Penguin.
So, I'm just going back, right? So now, so these very high level shows where incredible budgets are being spent, House of Dragons, right? So I would say that Game of Thrones kind of set the bar
Yeah.
for that theatrical level experience, but over time in streaming, right? So multiple episodes for multiple years where big audiences get hooked in. Um, uh, I would say that kind of the last, maybe The Walking Dead was the last show that wasn't like a streamer show at the time. It was still kind of like a classic TV that people waited for the next episode.
Yeah.
And also from a consumer-based society, we've become fast food junkies of entertainment. So whether it's, we spend most of our time scrolling.
Yeah.
That's what we spend most of our time doing. We don't spend our time sitting down and watching movies anymore, or being as much as we did. Now there are the big event movies. I'll talk like Top Gun 2, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar success film, but it also took 30 years to get made,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't like it didn't just pop up. It took forever to get it made, even with the biggest movie stars in the world. These things are people don't really understand how much time it takes to write a screenplay, put that script together, continue to develop that script, and then if you're a writer director like me, you're writing material for yourself. Or then if you're a producer and a writer and you've developed property, now you've got to go find a director that's willing to commit to the project, because they take years to make. And then you've got to find a lead actor that investors will still put their money behind. And, and we're in that time where the big old movie stars are starting to fade away. The new younger generation is coming up, but, you ask your average, teenager who Kevin Costner is, they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. They never heard of it.
Yeah.
Right. So as an example,
Yeah.
somebody that we both adore and share in common. So we're in this time where that movie in the middle is very rare. And if you can make one in that middle space and do an amazing job, then it has a tremendous opportunity for success. But again, when you come down to money, big money doesn't like to move small amounts of money. Do you understand? Okay. So big money, when somebody signs a deal that is controlling the kind of money that can make big movies and TV shows or video games, they don't want to move. Here's how to say it. It's as much paperwork and it's just as hard, or maybe even harder, to make a $10 million movie than it is to make a $100 million movie. It's easier.
Okay, so it might
to make the $100 million movie.
Okay, might as well do the bigger movie.
Yeah, than it is to make the $10 million movie. And if you have the right script, genre, and cast and director, money would rather put their money into the $100 million movie and then into the $10 million movie.
Okay.
Now, there's a reason for that, because when you study movies and you study business and you study historical returns over time, what you find is that the $100 million movies that are genre specific and really pointed at, core audience globally are radically more successful financially than the $10 million movies.
Okay, got it.
Most of the $10 million movies lose their money. Most of the $100 million movies properly done make their money back.
Okay. And I understand. It didn't make much sense to me when you started the argument, but now I see the reason. Okay.
Yeah, this is a reason.
Yeah.
Now, for me, if I'm a guy that's, let's just say I run an investment house and I'm investing into projects, I have a mandate. There's, as you know, there's trillions of dollars that people are investing into infrastructure, ports, cities, railways, rockets, cars, industry, telecommunications, computer systems, artificial intelligence, you name it. People still want very much to consume entertainment, and we're not that far away, quite frankly, and unfortunately, from where I can scan myself and I can tell AI to create a big action hero movie, where I am the hero and I win the beautiful girl at the end of the day. But first I have to kill 100 bad guys and I have to blow up, a city, and I have to, dive out of airplanes and escape out of submarines. And I can say all that and then AI will make it.
Yeah.
Like, we're not that far away, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, will it be good? Not necessarily, because you still need the creator, you know?
Yeah.
And there's an interesting, if you, not to get too spiritual about it, but if you jump to scripture, in the beginning, there was the word.
Okay.
So in the beginning, there's always the word. There's always the creation of the script. And even in AI, script creation comes from prompts. Prompts are what? Words.
Yes.
So in the beginning, there was the word. And for the word to come into existence, there has to be a creator.
Creator, yeah.
Okay. So, and I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm just
No, no, no,
arguing
no, yeah, no, I get it. I
the
understand.
existence of the creator.
Yeah.
So someone has to create. Someone has to say, I want to tell a story about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then from that, you articulate the story.
Yeah. There's got to be an input.
Yeah, it's got to be input.
Yeah.
And then you can use the tools, artificial intelligence as an example, to
Yeah.
help you craft a better screenplay. We do. We have AI read through our scripts and tell us where the mistakes are and
Yeah.
where we, left something out, or give us a prompt or an idea to how to make it better.
Yeah.
But we still have to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when you go to make a movie, even though, yeah, you can create a very lifelike, moving image that you think is real, that's a minute or two long, if you spend the time and learn all the prompts and, do it. Yes, you can do that. But ultimately, this process from a movie perspective and television of telling stories is still very much a co-creative game. And what I love about filmmaking is that it is the single most inclusive, co-creative art form on the planet today. There's no other art form that requires more artisans, more input, more creation, and all sort of having to culminate, through, in essence, a director. That's what a director does. Like a conductor of an orchestra, you are taking all these extraordinary artists and creators, and you're focusing them into, images and sound that somehow or another connect with the innate DNA of the human experience, and you're able to see yourself and relate to that story somehow through the unfoldment of those characters throughout time. So, and sticking with the most co-creative art form on the planet, you got to start to think about what it takes to put out a small or even a big movie. But if you just go on the surface level, writer, artist, often more than one, two writers, three writers, writer, okay, director, artist, producers have to do the art of finance,
Oh, yeah.
right? Actors, the art of performance, theater, right? Cinematographers, the art of cinematography. But with them comes the lighters, the gaffers, the lighting,
Yeah.
sound, the art of sound, not just the recording of voices and effects and stuff. But now let's get into what we just said, orchestration, especially if you have a real orchestra instead of a synthesized one. You can have up to 120 people playing different parts of music. And again, like I said, I know I mentioned already, but the sound design is huge. That's why you win Academy Awards for sound design.
Oh, yeah.
And then, the colorists. I mean, the people that come and color and grade the image to make it so magical. And now let's get into the visual effects and the visual effects artists. I mean, 10 years ago on a big, Marvel movie, you could have 5,000 digital artists that worked to make that movie visually come alive. Today, maybe with AI and everything, it's 500, and a couple of years it'll be 50, and a couple of years after that, maybe it'll be 5. But irrespective, you still have all of these artists. I mean, watch the credits at the end of a movie.
Endless.
It's endless.
Yeah.
And it takes all of those people bringing their best to the table for you as an audience member to have an experience. And hopefully that experience moves and inspires you, meaning the movie made you laugh. The movie made you cry. The movie made you
Feel
call
something.
your mother who you haven't called in 5 years. The movie made you, compelled you to forgive someone you haven't forgiven. The movie inspired you to reach deeper into yourself to do something greater with your life. That's their job. Their job is to inspire, I think, and to tell great stories. And and as filmmakers, sometimes we succeed wildly and sometimes we fail miserably.
It's part of the game, I guess.
That's part of the game.
Part of the game. So I want to dive into 3,000 Miles to Graceland, which I think is a massively uh, underrated, overlooked gem of a movie. The amount of people that I talk to who have seen it just adore it. It's a black humored action thriller. It's basically the first high profile film that you wrote and directed. And it starred two major stars, Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell. Where did the idea originate from? And what was the genesis of the project, basically?
Well, the idea originated in the mind of my writing partner, Richie Recco. We had been working on another project called Brooklyn Fiasco, which was like a New York mob movie, and my first independent film was like a dirty cop mob film, and the first script I wrote, Mulberry Street, was a mob picture, and I grew up in Soho and Little Italy in New York City, kind of as a child during the heyday of the mafia, when all the big mob bosses strolled through the city and were always on the TV and the news. And so, this was certainly, I was making films and writing about things that were in my world that were, very real for me. I really wanted to. I made my first independent film, and I wanted to create an iconic film. So, quite frankly, something that would catch the attention of Hollywood.
Okay.
You know, and 3,000 Miles to Graceland, very much, became that story. I wanted something iconic, and I wanted a character that was bigger than life. And, Jesus had already been done a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And, and in that world, it's kind of like, who is big, who is as big as Jesus, from a rock and roll,
Elvis.
perspective, and that was Elvis, right? So, for me, that's where the inspiration to make this project came from. And, I give a ton of credit to Richie, to Recco, to, really, grinding out a great, initial draft. As we discussed, scripts go through so many rewrites and so many changes, whether it's demands of the movie studio, demands of the actors, demands of locations and reality, director's vision, etc. So that began the journey of like just constantly working on that script and getting that script to a place where, we could shoot it. And my actual first choice dream cast for 3,000 Miles to Graceland was Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell. The little secret is I had the roles reversed.
Yeah.
So I had Kurt Russell
As the
in my
bad
mind
guy.
playing Murphy,
Yeah.
and not Kevin.
Yeah.
And then when I got the opportunity to meet Kevin and then have dinner with him, I think I had dinner with him 3 times before he finally said, "Hey, I hear you have a really cool movie idea. Why don't you pitch it to me?" And I said, "Sure, let me go to my car and get my pitch deck." Because in my car, I had all my flip books with all the images.
Wow. Do
Um,
you still have that?
that flip book, no, unfortunately,
Oh,
it burnt in fires.
wow.
As you know, we went
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
some devastating fires here in California. So I'm in my new home. It's only a few months that we've been here, and just kind of like we're all getting back on our feet again. So yeah, lots of things are gone,
Yeah.
but it makes space for
Sorry.
new. It's okay. It's part of life, and not my first burn. Maybe one day I'll make a movie about. Well, things usually burn in the films I make anyway. Um, so yeah, we went on this adventure. So I pitched it to Kevin, and literally he said, "I'm going to tell you something, Demian. That might be one of the single best pitches I've ever heard. But if I ever made a movie like that, I would play Murphy, the bad guy." And so then that began the journey of, you know, getting Kevin to commit to playing Murphy. And I'll be very direct. It was 100% Kevin's commitment to me as a filmmaker and to playing that role that got the movie funded. The movie was fully funded with Kevin on board. And then when he asked me who I wanted to play Michael, I said I wanted Kurt Russell. And then, he said, okay. Then, he hadn't made movies for years,
Yeah,
and so
you were responsible for
100% for
bringing
basically
him
pulling
back.
him,
Yeah.
bringing him back.
Yeah.
And, and so that began that journey of, of making that movie with those iconic guys. Now, for me as an independent filmmaker, I had come to the table going, oh, I want to make a little $6 to $8 million indie, kind of get my Quentin Tarantino vibe going, blah blah blah, and it became a much larger studio budgeted feature, which comes with all of its own politics and financial issues and obligations. But the movie itself, was an amazing experience making it. Certainly have all the different trials and tribulations that we can talk about at some point in time about making a movie and dealing with movie studios and big agencies and movie stars and differing opinions. But the movie also was ahead of its time. I'm very, was aggressively ahead of its time. And that's why today, when you talk to lots of people, they'll still tell you, oh my God, that's one of my favorite movies of all time. It has become an international, global cult classic and
Absolutely.
beloved by millions of film fans around the world. But that didn't necessarily help my movie career at the time,
Yeah.
right? Because the studios, they didn't know what to do with a movie like that. They didn't understand how to market it. They didn't understand how to distribute it. They think they do, but they don't. And they're just throwing things up against the wall. And the truth is whereas the movie for you is everything you've thought about, worked on, and concentrated on for anywhere from 3 to 5 years, for them, it's just one of 20 things they've got to put out that year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's, there's 2 a month and, next. There's not unless you really fight for it and you have the power to fight for it, and, I'm still as much as I've made Hollywood films, and I've worked for I've done independents and I've done big movie studio and I'm still an outsider, from my perspective in the business. I am not a filmmaker that the studios are, trying hard to get a relationship with and to make their content. So, but what's really interesting, which I try to point out often to, I don't know what the right word is, uninitiated neophytes, people who don't really understand. I go, look, what people especially in the independent kind of finance world, especially where these independent financiers come in to be producers and to be in the movie business and to do all that, is what people seem to have forgotten is that movies are made by filmmakers.
Yeah.
That's how they're made. And if you look at a big movie studio, so what do? Like, they even if you take a megastar like Tom Cruise, who's an amazing film producer and works with like McQuarrie, the incredible director, it is a director, a great producer and a movie star, and around them thousands of people go to work.
Yeah.
But it is driven by the creative mind of a few people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're at a major studio. If you look at the big studios, the way they operate, like take Chris Nolan as an amazing filmmaker, is they concentrate on having a relationship with a incredible and powerful filmmaker.
Yeah.
And there's a reason they're called filmmakers, because they make films. They're the filmmaker. Yeah. So what people have forgotten, especially in the independent world and in this like fast to streaming, is that the films are made by filmmakers.
Yeah.
And they've forgotten that quite a bit. So you have a lot of crap and a lot of shit movies with terrible directing and bad performances and bad scripts, and because it's being run and driven by finance an accountant person.
Yeah.
It's not being created by the filmmaker. And what they try to do today, and I've been dealing with this myself, even on my last movie, is they work very hard to strip the filmmaker of their power, to take the things the filmmaker needs to make the movie away, right? And then use the movies as ways to fund their own pockets rather than create. So the way a what I call the kind of low end slime bag financing producers of today, the way they work, and I'm talking directly to you fuckers, is that it's like, well, if I can get 4 movies going right away and I can take $250,000 fee on each movie, then I can make $1 million in fees. And all I have to do is make these 4 movies as cheaply as I can for the least amount of money as I can, and take every ounce of time, energy, and money away from the filmmaker so that I can make sure I, as a middle, low class financing entity, take as much money from the movie as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's just
A lot of producers today aren't even real producers. The real producers of the past, they shepherded the script, they worked with the cast and the director, they protected the director from everything they could because they know that the director is the filmmaker, and they have to protect the filmmaker so that the filmmaker can make the movie. And instead, what they often do today is they attack the filmmaker. Look, even today, right now, what's happening with Kevin Costner.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
He's being attacked
Yeah,
for being a filmmaker.
absolutely. Yeah.
He's being attacked by the banks, being attacked by his movie studio distribution partners, being attacked by low-level crew people, being, attacked by financing people, being attacked. And what is he? He's a writer, he's a producer, he's a director, he's a movie star, and guess what? He's also the financier,
Financier as well. Yeah.
putting in tens upon tens of millions of dollars of his own money.
Yeah.
Yet instead of lifting him up, supporting him, and backing him, they attack him.
Yeah. It's just
They sue him.
yeah, it's
They
unbelievable.
go after him.
Yeah.
And think of how much joy and pleasure and honor and respect that a man like Kevin Costner has brought to the entertainment industry and brought to filmmaking.
Yeah.
He's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He's one of the biggest Academy Award winning film directors in the world. And yet he's attacked.
Yeah. It's just
right? So
yeah.
this is what I'm talking about. So this mindset, if you want to know like where the rotten core of this world is right now, is in attacking the creator. And now getting a little biblical, what did they do with Jesus?
Yeah, they persecuted him and attacked.
They persecuted him. What was he preaching hatred? No. He was preaching love and inclusiveness and direct connection to God.
Yeah, yeah.
Who did he go after? He went after the lying bankers and financial thieves. And he was an extraordinary storyteller.
Yeah.
Yet he was persecuted and nailed to the cross.
Yeah. And
right?
it's not the first time that they've gone after Kevin. It seems like these people have whether it's the press, whether it's somebody that just like seem to like going after him. Like I'm thinking
Yeah,
about
Kevin said
Dante,
something to me when we made 3,000 Miles to Graceland. He
crazy.
said something that I didn't understand at the time, but man, did I understand it when I was finishing the movie. As he said, you know, basically, welcome to the big time. And I want you to know you now have a target painted on your back, and people are coming after you.
Yeah,
And he literally told me that. I kind of laughed it off because I'm a tough guy. And, I can
from New
handle
York.
anything.
Yeah,
New York street guy. You want to scrap, let's scrap. You want to fight, let's fight. But wow, was he right? The level of attack from my best friends, from my creative partners, from the studios, from the agencies, from other movie star, like you name it, the attacks never stopped.
yeah, yeah. This is incredible. And
I was
also,
just like,
yeah,
and
the mocking also. It's what the press. What the press does is they mock you. They make fun of you. It's not constructive criticism. It's just cute criticism. And
it's, well, today in today's world we call it clickbait.
yeah,
Clickbait.
clickbait. And I don't. Why would you want to like bring somebody down? Just does it make you feel any better about
Well,
yourself?
I call it I had a talk with some people about this the other night, and there's I call it the crab phenomenon. So I grew up in New York City, and I grew up in an area called Soho, and but I was surrounded by the West Village, the East Village, the Little Italy, Chinatown. You understand? So I would walk through the streets of Little Italy, and then I'd walk through the streets of Chinatown. Chinatown, they had the fish markets, right?
Yeah,
And so you'd go through, and people and the restaurants would be buying, and there'd be giant buckets of crabs,
yeah,
blue crabs,
yeah,
right? People like to eat crab. And if you go to these buckets and if you watch a bucket of crabs, there's a very interesting phenomenon, which is most of the crabs. So let's say there's 50 or crabs in a bucket.
yeah.
45 of those crabs will not leave the bucket. They will stay on top of each other, maneuvering for position, moving around, but they stay in the bucket.
Yeah,
They never leave the bucket. A
good.
couple of those crabs, 3 to 5 of them, will always try to climb out of the bucket, get out.
Yeah,
And the phenomena that happens is that the crabs that are in the bucket reach up with their claws,
yeah.
grab the leg of the crab trying to climb out, and yank it back down into the bucket.
Yeah, this is what happens in Hollywood when you reach the top.
Or
Right?
or you're trying to climb out.
Or you think,
So it's just now, and then you would ask the question, well, why, if that's the case, would somebody continue to create? Why would you continue to engage in this world that is so vicious and cruel and deviant and backstabbing and whatever? You know,
it's
um,
kind of a calling, I guess.
yeah, it's because you're compelled to do it. When I teach film, people ask me about film or what they should do. What I literally say is I can say, if you can think of anything else on the entire planet that you would rather do for fun and money, do that instead. Literally anything. Would you rather sell real estate? Would you rather be a yacht broker? Would you rather be, a scuba instructor in the Bahamas? Would you rather be a ski instructor in Switzerland? Would you rather play tennis? Would you rather, like anything you can think of that you would rather do,
Go out and do it.
go out and do that instead of trying to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But filmmakers are storytellers, and it's in our blood. And this is a global phenomenon. right? Filmmaking crosses every race, religion, creed, and color.
Yeah.
And all filmmakers that truly are making films or endeavoring to make films all understand each other at a deep level. It's one of the reasons why the Directors Guild of America is the most powerful entertainment union in the world.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
Directors
Directors Guild
Guild
of America.
of
Yeah.
America,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's filled with people, not just directors. There's also assistant directors, second assistant directors, production managers, line producers, etc., unit managers, production associates from television. Like, it's TV directors, feature directors, comedy special directors, all kinds of directors, sports, entertainment. But almost everything you ever watch or see, news program, big sporting event, motion picture, television series, daytime talk show, there's a director
Yeah. Yeah.
in all of those.
So I'm gonna ask you, what was it like working and collaborating with Kevin? And I know that he's a very script-driven actor, and he does not like the scripts that he agrees to do to be meddled with. Dances with Wolves, for instance, did not have a single rewrite, and I know that's the case for a bunch of other of his movies that he's done. So I was wondering, what was he like? Like, what was your collaboration with him like?
I
Uh,
think that where he is, like you said with scripts, is that a script in it by its nature is a living, breathing, uh, act of creation and storytelling.
mhm.
And Kevin was very collaborative in working on dialogue, scenes, scripts, action, the overall script. He certainly had thoughts, opinions, input, and those thoughts, opinions, and input he gives. And then if you disagree with something, you've got to come to the table with why you disagree, and here is what I think is the better idea,
Like a
right?
sound
And
reason.
right, and then he's either going to agree or disagree, and then you're got to be, as a filmmaker, with your lead star, who's in Kevin's case is also an Academy Award winning director. You've got to what I would always call pick my battles. Which thing am I going to fight for because I adamantly believe in the way I see it, or which thing is a choice? Like, yeah, it could go that way, it could go this way. They both work.
Hmm.
If Kevin felt very strongly about something that I didn't feel strongly about, we'll call that an easy change, right?
Okay.
If he felt strongly about something that I disagreed with, that is a difficult change, because I'm unwilling to just change something just because somebody else wants to change it,
Yeah.
even if it's Kevin
Yeah.
or Kurt Russell or anybody. So, what the process was like is working on the script with Kevin, working on the script with Kurt, then getting Kevin and Kurt to both agree, and sometimes they heavily disagreed on how scenes should go, but coming up with that final script. And then, yes, once that script is locked, Kevin doesn't want to change a thing. The issue with filmmaking, and when you're also dealing with other actors and scenes, is that things change. They change because it was supposed to be a beautiful sunny day at the
Yeah.
beach, and you get there and it's terrible thunderstorms, but you've got nowhere else to go. So now you're shooting in the rain.
Yeah.
And
So
then
you,
because you shot in the rain, it changed the next scene, where I'm just making this up, but the lead actor and actress were supposed to come back from the beach, take a shower, get hot and steamy and sexy, and then make love. But instead, they come in from the pouring rain, they're already wet
yeah.
and they're already steaming, let's say, because of the temperature or whatever. And now you're you're cutting out the shower scene and you're going right with like, I don't need one. God gave me a shower,
Yeah.
right? So the point is that things change and you have to a certain degree, be willing to change with it as you go. Uh,
Adapt.
Kevin understands that as an actor, but he won't do it. He understands it as a director and will do it as a director, I think. But as an actor, he doesn't want to change it. And there's a reason for that because, to deliver a great performance and to lock into a character, the actors really got to do their work, their internal work. There's a saying in filmmaking that, casting is 90% of the job, meaning that if the actor can bring it to the performance, there's kind of an expectation that your crew is professional, that it's a good camera and it's good lighting and good, like it's kind of an expectation, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a reason there's 150 people there or 5,000 people or 5 people, but they're there because hopefully they know what they're doing technically. And now your job is to create the environment as a filmmaker in which, that actor can deliver. And great actors like Kevin really spend time in the material. They really dive into the nuance and the meaning of each and every word
Yeah.
and connect their own experience, their own ability as a performer. And then, when you watch an extraordinary performance, it's because it's not just that they're a great actor, but because they are living and breathing that character.
Yeah, they've lived with the words, they've
Yeah,
lived with the
everything.
script. Yeah.
And if you go and change, for Kevin especially, even one word, you know, where she stepped into the room, he turned and looked at her as the sun was setting over her shoulder, and the word magnificent came out of his mouth. I'm just making this up, right?
Yeah.
Magnificent. And then you changed it to, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
Because the other actor was like, why would he say magnificent to me? Why wouldn't he just say, hey, how you doing? So I think it should be, hey, how you doing? That's better for me. But the other actor has spent 2 months thinking about that one line,
Yeah.
how they're going to deliver it.
Yeah, yeah, I
So,
yeah, he's very specific about that.
yeah.
Very, very much so. And what was if you recall, what was the relationship that they had, Kevin and Kurt Russell, their professional relationship on set? What was it like? Was it playful? Was it more, what was it like?
No, I wouldn't say that it was playful. I would say that it was like they they kind of lived their characters. And I'm not going to say they were method acting, but Kurt's character was more playful, um, or dangerous and lethal, you know, and they stuck very much to their characters.
Okay.
Then there's the time where they disagreed with each other and they both refused to come to set and do the scene the way the other actor wanted to do the scene. It's a perfect example of where Kurt decided to change the script overnight and
Oh,
then delivered new version of the scene, and Kevin absolutely refused to do it.
so Russell wrote himself a new version of the
Yeah,
scene? Oh,
yeah,
wow. Without telling anyone?
pretty much. I mean, he told one of the producers
Okay.
and then delivered it the new word saying, "This is how I'm going to do this scene." And Kevin was like, "Absolutely not. There's absolutely no way I'm doing the scene that way." So that set up one of my difficult days where you know Kevin's like, "I'm definitely not doing that, and that's not happening, and we're doing it as scripted." And then Kurt's like, "Well, if we're not doing it the way I've changed it, then I'm not doing it." So
And
they both refused to do it.
how did you resolve it?
I
Like,
sat in my director's chair and I asked my line producer, and my assistant director to tap me on the shoulder every time I had spent $50,000. That included production and star salaries,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
every 5 minutes, they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You just spent $50,000." So by the time I got close to $500,000 in money that had been wasted just sitting there, because I tried, "Hey, will you guys come to set?" No. "Kevin, will you come to? No. Kurt, will you? No." Or I just, but pretty soon it got to the point where I just had to ask myself a very, very simple question, which is I stood outside of the two trailers of these two incredibly talented and world famous men, and I asked myself one question: which one of these men is my friend? Very simple.
Kevin.
And Kevin was my friend, and Kurt wasn't. And so I knocked on his door, and he told me to go away, and I knocked again, and I walked into his trailer, and he said no. It's the first thing he said, no. And I said, "Kevin, let me ask you a question. Filmmaker to filmmaker, director to director, if you were me and this was the situation, what would you do?" And he said, "I would stand outside the two trailers and ask myself which one of these men is my friend. And then I'd walk into that one. But I'm still a no."
Hmm. Um,
Eventually we did make a few changes that, Kevin agreed with. And I argued a point of why some of the changes were actually good. Kevin eventually agreed, and was willing to change a few of the lines and the way the scene went, and that is the jail scene when both of them are arrested and both of them are thrown in jail, and
okay.
then the interaction they have when Kurt Russell's character is released and Kevin's character stays in jail.
Yeah.
That was the scene specifically.
Yeah.
So but it was when I look back on it, I'm super grateful for that moment in time because it was one of my greatest film lessons of all time, in where you have to stand as a filmmaker, a director, and a creator, where you have to stand as a writer, where you have to stand as a producer, because I was writer, producer, and director on that movie,
Yeah.
and how you have to interact with incredibly talented and powerful people, um, who are all making very strong points. But the hard truth of a film, which again is forgotten and lost on many people, also a lot of actors, is that the filmmaker is making the movie, not the actor.
Yeah.
You know, and you see this playing out in the media with famous actors suing their directors and the directors suing the actors and things, because this concept becomes forgotten for people, that it's the filmmaker that's making the movie.
Yeah.
No director, no movie.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
you know
And a few years ago, I spoke with our mutual friend Miklos, who was one of the editors on the movie.
yeah,
And
brilliant editor.
yeah, and he recounted the whole thing about there being the two cuts to the movie, one that Kurt Russell came up with and one that Kevin came up with. Uh, and Kevin's was more action oriented and it scored very, very high. Uh, would you like tell me how this actually went down? I mean, you were the
Well,
creative force behind
the
the whole project.
yeah, there's again, there's an edit that is, you know, what I call the God-given DGA edit,
Yeah.
which is the Directors Guild of America, under union law, mandates that the director of the movie is given uninterrupted 2.5 months, that's 10 weeks, to edit the story that that filmmaker feels they're trying to tell.
Yeah.
And I made that edit with Miklos and another editor. And it was pretty vigorous and intense and cutting edge, much more cutting edge than the edit you see today. And much more in alignment with my vision as a filmmaker. Then I sent a copy of that edit to Kurt Russell, and I sent a copy of that edit to Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin, you know, had some great notes, character and story notes, was super impressed with the edit, which is why Miklos, my oldest friend and who I brought in to edit the movie, has been his editor on almost every movie he's made since 3,000 Miles to Graceland, because he's a brilliant editor and storyteller, and really knows how to extract the filmmaker's vision and then show you how it could be even better than you thought it could be. Extraordinarily talented filmmaker, who's writing and developing his own movie to direct now, which
Oh,
is
really?
pretty cool. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. I think he'll be a great director. So we had this edit. Now, again, like I said, Kevin was very impressed with it and had some great notes. On the other hand, Kurt Russell hated it. He thought it was the worst thing he'd ever seen, that I totally succumbed to violence and action and had left out all the love and the heart and the humor of the love story, and demanded sweeping changes. You know, now Kurt in the business is also known as a guy that likes to take over directors' movies and recut them to his vision. So he is known for that. Now, I didn't understand the extent to which he would do that. So to make this short, when I refused to make these huge sweeping changes he was demanding, because it was not the movie I was making, he went on the attack and demanded to take over control of the movie, when the unions refused to let him do that, and when the studios and the big movie star agencies like CAA got involved. By the way, both Kurt and I, and eventually Kevin, were all clients of CAA,
Okay.
big creative artists agency. And then they didn't want to get in the middle of it. And then the financier finally decided to basically split the edit and give Kurt his own version. And then I could continue with my version. And then they would screen both versions back to back and to see which one scored higher. And whichever one scored 3 points, which is very little, in a spread from 0 to 100. So if one scored 70 and the other scored 73, the one that scored 73 is the one that would go, right?
Okay.
So whichever one scored 3 points or higher would be the one that me, as the filmmaker, I had to finish, even if it wasn't my version.
Got it.
Or I was fired from my movie. And then I said, okay, so, and if I score 3 points or higher, they're like, well, then you can finish your version. I said, okay. So this was not cool and it was not great. It was a terrible thing. And what they didn't do is they didn't give more money to do it.
Oh,
Just took the budget and cut it in half and gave half of the post budget to Kurt and half of the post budget editorial to me.
yeah,
Now, Kurt is now, and then they took my other editor. So I had Miklos and Duffy, the
yeah,
other editor, and they gave the other editor, Duffy, to Kurt
sure, yeah.
and kept Miklos, of course, who's my oldest friend, with me. And now we had competing edits going in the same building, in the same floor, um, and Duffy had to do what Kurt said. And in principle, Miklos and I were now left to do ours. Now, when Kevin found out about this, he, to say he got upset is an understatement. But there's a reason for this. Two reasons. One is that when we were first making the movie and Kurt had a different vision for the film, Kevin asked him if he was making the movie that we were making, meaning Demian and Kevin are making a movie called 3,000 Miles to Graceland, and you're talking about a different movie, like literally a different film. So are you making the movie we're making, or are you trying to make a different movie? Because if you're trying to make a different movie, then this movie's not for you. Now you have to understand, I was signed, Kevin was signed, Kurt wasn't signed yet.
Oh,
Not yet signed.
yeah, yeah,
To the
to the
movie.
movie. Yeah.
And then he stopped and and he looked us in the eye and he said, "No, I'm making the same movie you guys are making." And Kevin put his hand out and said, "Shake on it. It's man to man." And Kurt shook his hand and my hand, said, "We're all making the same movie together." That turned out not to be the case at all. And he 100% tried to take over the movie and demanded total control of the edit. And in the end, as I said, they gave him his own edit. In the end, Kevin ended up saying, "Okay, if he's cutting his version, now we're cutting our version." So I want to be clear. It wasn't Kevin's version of the movie. It was the version Miklos and I had cut. And then Kevin came in and then sat down for a long time in the edit studio with us and started making a lot of creative choices.
Got it.
Many of them were brilliant. Some of them I disagreed with. Even later in life, he apologized for, saying, "Hey, man, I think I was a little too heavy-handed in your edit." And I was like, I think that you did everything you could in a terrible situation. But it was not a good situation because you had competing edits. And instead of the cast joined together and everybody, supporting the film director,
And pulling on the same rope.
there was an entire group of people, including both of my producing partners, that all decided to side with Kurt because they thought the movie that the studio was going to back Kurt's version. And so people that were my friends for decades, and some new friends and actors and producers, and they all sided on Kurt's side. And then the only people really left were Kevin, Miklos, and myself. And we went to work on our version. And then there's a company called NRG, and NRG does movie screenings and scores where they take the audience tests and they record the laughter and the ahs and the ohs and the oohs, and they measure it all and they compile a score. And then at the end, you get a score.
Yeah.
And so the heads of the Warner Brothers studio, the head of CAA, the movie stars, the head financing guy, that we were all in the back hallway between the two movie theaters after the screening, and they came and delivered the scores. And first they showed it to the movie studio boss, and then they showed it to the financier, and then they showed it to the agency guys. and then they showed it to us. And all I can tell you is that, one score was 20 points higher than the other score plus. And that was our version, was 20 points higher. That's significant. That's not a small amount.
Yeah, that's not 3 points.
No,
That's
it's not 3 points. That's 20 plus points. So control of finishing was handed back over to us. But they didn't give us the extra money that they spent. They didn't let us do a whole lot of things we wanted to do. They said, well, we're over budget. And I said, you're over budget because you spent all this money on a competing version of the movie. Now I need to finish this version of the movie. So there was a lot of that. And then, and in the end, the person that was the most supportive of the film, again, was Kevin. Instead of having a unified cast and experience, and team and crew, it had clearly been split. And to this very day, and we're 25 years later, I still don't speak to the man at the time that I considered my best friend, who was my producing partner. I had two best friends. I had Eric Manis and Miklos Wright. And Eric and I still don't speak today because of that event. Because he sided with Kurt Russell. And when I asked him why he did that, he said, because when you lose this fight, you're going to need a friend that's on the other team. That was his reasoning. When you lose, you're going to need a friend on the other team.
Oh, great friend. Wow.
So, I've kept this story quiet. I don't talk about this. This is really only the first time I've even really talked about it, because it's a quarter of a century later and I really don't give a shit anymore what anybody thinks.
Yeah.
It's like, and by the way, it's much worse and much more intense and much bigger than I'm saying it is.
Yeah.
But, friendships were destroyed, relationships were destroyed, careers were destroyed, and it all stemmed from almost entirely from the ego of one person.
But you made a great friend in Kevin.
Yeah, because when you go through a battle like that, when you go through a creative war, or a physical war, there's an old saying, it's you really find out who your friends are when things go bad, right?
Yeah.
When everything's great,
yeah, it's easy.
Champagne's flowing and the yacht is floating, and
very easy.
it's very easy for everybody to be like, woo, woo, woo.
Yeah.
But when things go bad, it's like rats escaping a sinking ship. Everybody runs, and then people that are still involved, they are trying to, for many people, which is truly unfortunate, it doesn't become about honor, integrity, sacrifice, duty, friendship. It becomes about, who do I think is going to win this fight?
It's just so low. It's just
so a lot of people sell out.
Yeah, so, I don't think I don't think these people were your friends in the first place, given how they behaved during that situation. I don't think they were.
No, and they're not. They clearly define themselves as not my friend.
Yeah.
Whereas to this day, Kevin and Miklos are still two of my best friends in the world.
Yeah.
And Kevin at one point turned and said to me, look, we may die bloody on the sword on this one, but we're going into this fight together. And that's what we did. And that's why to this day, Kevin has kept Miklos by his side, because Miklos was in one of the greatest creative warriors you could ever have. If you have like an image of like 3 Vikings surviving an unsurvivable battle, because they fought together and saved each other time and again. That was Kevin, Miklos, and I. That was my experience.
Yeah.
And I want to say one other thing,
Sure.
since we're on this subject. When the greatest fire disaster in the history of California and one of the greatest fire disasters in the history of the United States happened on January 7th. And when the Pacific Palisades, a large part of Malibu, of course, there was also the Eaton, Pasadena fires and other ones all happening at the same time. And hundreds of thousands of people's lives were turned upside down. And, you know, literally the only way to explain it is like a nuclear bomb went off and obliterated a city. The entire city gone overnight. And homes destroyed, businesses destroyed, luckily minimal loss of life. Instead of thousands of people, I think like 30 something people died in those fires.
Livelihoods lost. Livelihoods were lost. Livelihoods.
Livelihoods, generations of wealth that you can never get back. Just so much loss that it's impossible to comprehend other than to put it into a war, right? Like entire city bombed out of existence in one night. One of the first people to call me was Kevin. While the fires were raging and the city was burning and everyone was panicking, and you have the clothes on your back and your wife and children, and your car and your wallet, that's what you had.
Yeah.
One of the first people to call was Kevin. His first question was whether or not I was safe, and I said I wasn't. And then he said, drive to my home in Santa Barbara, which is where we went and where my family, my wife and my children stayed, and were able to escape a great deal of the trauma of that massive, practically 9/11 level event that still is impacting every day hundreds of thousands of lives. Tens of thousands of people still homeless. Their homes gone forever. And they'll never get them back, by the way. They'll never get them back. Wow. So, and Kevin never talks about that.
Yeah.
He doesn't ever tell anybody that, but that in one of my single greatest hours of need, as a man, as a husband, as a father, Kevin 100% showed up. Shelter, food, support, love, talking it out, just always talking. Let's sit down, let's have coffee, let's talk. And gave me the time to be able to stabilize myself, which took a couple weeks, and kind of focus in and be able to find a place where I could move my wife and children, which is where I am right now, and start again, which is, in essence what we're doing. And many, many, many other miracles that came out of all of that. Well, but again, that's the person Kevin is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, and then, which is why I find it, again, fascinating that someone that has given so much to the world, travel the world and tell me how many adoring, loving fans of Kevin Costner there is.
Countless.
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 Countless. Can't count it.
No, yeah, that's true. It is true.
It's countless.
Countless.
And yet, here he is, once again, trying to create an epic story that illuminates the in essence, the birth of the United States and the tragedy and the destruction and the death and the love and the passion and the sacrifice and all of the things that happened during that time, and trying to condense that and tell that in an epic story. And instead of being supported and uplifted and lauded and acknowledged for one of the treasures, creative treasures of this planet, he's just being attacked.
Yeah, I just cannot comprehend it. It hurts me, because I know how much of his heart and soul he puts into his artistic endeavors, and especially Horizon. And to see him get mauled and attacked like that, it just makes me so. It just makes me. It hurts me, and
Yeah, I think it's hurting a lot of people, and and I think all human beings are fallible, right?
yeah,
We all sin, we all make mistakes,
oh
we
yeah,
all
absolutely.
have there are very few people on the planet that have ever lived that can claim any form of perfection, right? And yet, what I want to see happen is I want to see the creators, especially people like Kevin, and there are others,
Yeah,
um, be supported and be uplifted and be given the opportunities to create and to tell good stories. There are many people today who are brilliant filmmakers who have made unbelievable movies who can't get a movie made today, you know,
yeah,
but they've made movies like Die Hard.
yeah. John McTiernan, yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Crazy that
he's
that guy isn't
brilliant.
given a chance after all the great movies he's done. It's
Yeah,
crazy. Just two more questions
go
if
ahead.
you got the time. One is if you had the ch no, sorry. Have you ever thought about doing something else with the 3K MTG property? If you
I have, but I don't own it, so I
Yeah,
don't even
if
worry
you
about it.
owned it, what would you do like with it?
Well, first thing I'd do if I owned it is I would do a massive director's recut, the
Okay.
extended version.
So the material is still there to do it?
Somewhere, somebody
Okay.
has it somewhere.
Okay. And have you and Kevin ever thought about doing something else together, another feature, another
Yeah,
project?
we're always talking about things. I have a movie I'm developing right now where I very much want Kevin to play the president of the United States of America.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
that's
So, we'll see. I don't,
well, I
again,
hope you get
he is material driven, right?
yeah.
So does the material inspire him and does he feel that he can embody that character? I think he'd be the perfect president of the United States of America.
For
You
sure.
know, but in my story, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do have a character I want him to play. Maybe he'll do it. Maybe he won't. He's got a lot on his plate and a lot of things he himself is doing,
Yeah.
you know, and and it takes a lot of energy to have to defend against attacks from the outside while you're just trying to create.
Yeah. I'm sure that's taking a lot out of him.
Yeah, it takes a lot out of people.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like our creations are like our children. Are they as important as our living flesh and blood children? No. That's how we relate to them as creators. Those are our creations. Those are our children.
But one more question before I forget. If
Yeah.
Just one more question. I remember you telling me that a still photographer on 3K MTG had taken lots and lots of black and white photographs during the making of the movie. Is that correct?
Yep, Thomas Donnelly. Yeah, and he actually even had created like a book, like
Yeah,
an
I
entire
remember you.
picture book.
Yeah, and
Um,
he owns that. He owns that.
yeah, he still has the material. I think that that would be another great thing. You know, we tried to get the book published.
You did?
It's shocking that no one would publish it because it was
Why?
just filled with like 20 movie stars and everything, and had the most brilliant photographs in it. But yeah, I would love to revisit that at one point in time and get the story, the deeper story, a bunch of what we said today, the
Hmm.
real story, the truth, because I'm not trying to protect myself or anybody else from the truth. I
Yeah,
think telling the truth is a good thing. Uh,
absolutely.
and then truth is subjective. Everybody has their own opinion,
Yeah,
right?
I guess so.
Um,
Well, if you ever get rolling with that, give me a holler. If I can help out, contribute, I would love to.
sure, we need, as we said, we need our friends.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Lichtenstein, for your time, your kindness, and being willing to share all of this. And sorry I've taken up so much of your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Pietro. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay. Ciao.